At first light, if that gray smear could even be called light, my handler snapped the buckle on my harness and the world became straps, steel, and scent. The Vox on his chest hissed with catechisms, boots thudded in rhythm, and somewhere a siren sobbed and then swallowed itself. To the men it seemed like another quiet sweep, ash underfoot, smoke above, nothing moving but our own shadows. To me the morning was already wrong. Normal has a smell. Even here in the fossil stink of promethium, rust, and old fear, there are patterns I know. I can count them without thought. The iron tang of dried blood powdered into dust, oil dripping from cracked machine bone, the wool sour of fatigues that never fully dry, and my handler's skin with its salt, stress, in the faint copper of a healing cut on his thumb. But this morning another note threaded through it all, like a wire pulled taut. Sweet, rotten, thin, but undeniable. Fruit gone soft inside its skin. Laughter you hear before anyone speaks. I froze, nose lifted, chest tight, ears trembling. The leash went taut and my handler whispered, "Easy." His gloved fingers pressed against my neck, a steadying anchor. He trusted my nose, always had, even when no one else did. I breathed again, slower, mapping the air in layers. The sweet wire was everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the city itself exhaled decay through teeth it never had. We halted at a quarantine tape that flapped like a tongue in the soot-laden wind. A trooper hesitated, the kind of man who still remembered his first name. He hesitated too long. The commissar noted him, raised a bolt pistol, and spoke only a single word before pulling the trigger. One shot, one lesson. The trooper folded into the dust like a coat shrugged off a hook, his name buried with him in silence. No one spoke, not even a murmur, and the Vox filled the gap with praise to the Emperor twisted into chant. The leash slackened under my jaw and my handler's hand steadied, his voice raised just enough to be heard by the overseer. "We heed the hound," he said, loud enough to be remembered but quiet enough to be forgiven if he was wrong. The squad moved forward and I pulled them left, away from the tape, nose dragging them into the truth no one wanted to admit. The street bled into a corridor where the walls sweated mold. My pads whispered over concrete slick with ash. Every step gave me another story. The taste of old disinfectant mixed with vomit powdered fine, the iron filings of a collapsed machine spirit's bones. And then, there, the sweetness grew sharp, charred like sugar held too long to flame. Not corpse, not yet. The scent of a story just beginning. My hackles rose without my permission, ears straining forward. I veered right, tugging the leash, circling a door marked by a half-scraped medici sigil. On its threshold, my mouth filled with saliva I didn't want. Behind me, my handler's boot slowed. He followed my nose because he always did. I circled again, pushing my muzzle against the crack. The sweet rot hummed in my teeth. Inside, the silence of a place that once healed and now only remembered how. Beds sat with their mouths open, gurneys overturned like broken animals. Bandages dangled from hooks and threads, too clean for this place, swinging in air that had forgotten the meaning of stillness. A drip stand lay on its side, its tubes snaking beneath a mattress like a vein severed from its heart. My filter itched against my muzzle, every breath fogging its lens. I nosed an overturned tray. The residue there was not blood, not entirely, but thicker, darker, sour sweet. My handler crouched where I pointed with my head, scraping a smear into a file. His gloves trembled before he hit it. He glanced at the slime like it might blink back at him. Someone in the squad muttered, "Call it in!" And the radio choked back containment codes stacked like bricks. Cordon, purge light, decon, sanction. My ears flattened against my skull. The sweetness in the air sharpened another half step. I backed away, teeth bared at nothing, my mouth watering with hunger that didn't belong to me. Hunger that made me afraid of myself. Later we ate because the schedule demanded it. The ration brick crumbled like dry paper, tasteless on good days and worse on bad. I refused it. I set my share down and stared at it hard enough to hope it vanished. My handler broke off a corner with his teeth, laughing with a wet throat, pretending for the others that my refusal was stubborn whim. I laid my head on his knee and pressed my chest against his leg, letting him feel the vibration of my growl through bone. His fingers scratched inside my ear, in the place where I was still soft, and his whisper was warmer than the air around us. "Good nose." He made it sound like praise, but it felt like prayer. A prayer he did not know if anyone heard. Dusk that wasn't dusk brought the column through. Medici helms, faceless and gleaming, commissarial coats that cut the air like evening shadows. They moved as though the city had been built to part around them. The squad masked up, filters checked, muzzles tightened. Someone clipped my filter snug against my face. Breath became sound, drumming in my head. The commissar's glass eye found me, heavy as a boot pressing on my back. He said nothing. He didn't need to. A hand signal cut the street, and we flowed toward the hab stack that made the Vox stutter earlier. The door gave like wet cardboard when pushed. Inside was a hallway lined with doors, wallpaper peeling into shapes that reached toward us. Silence tried to hold its breath, but the building betrayed it. Thud. A single sound behind the third door left. A rhythm too steady, too wrong. We stacked against the frame, waiting for the breach. My handler pressed 2 fingers under my collar, grounding me, telling me without words that I was his anchor as much as he was mine. The breacher moved, the door swung, and the sweet note burst wide into the air like laughter that had been waiting all along. She lay on the floor with her back bent at angles no spine should make, eyes rolled too far, as though she had been caught trying to look into her own skull. A dark halo spread from her mouth, frothing and sticky. She tried to whisper something, but the word rose as a cluster of bubbles that popped wetly against her teeth. My ears pinned back on their own. The sweetness in the air climbed higher, twining itself through copper blood and fatty smoke. Her arm moved once, jerking in a way that didn't belong to human bone. The squad did what squads do. Fire in controlled arcs, flames first because fire doesn't argue. The heat pushed at us, curling smoke through the corridor. My handler tugged me back. "Heel, heel, good dog," and I obeyed because I always obeyed. But obedience did nothing to scrub the smell. It crawled into my chest and wound itself tight around my ribs. The corridor became a storm. Prayers clashed with orders, flamers hissed, boots stamped, and through it all, doors banged open as if the building wanted to prove it was alive. People spilled out, not yet corpses, but no longer themselves. Some staggered forward with arms out, pleading. Others shrieked as black froth poured from their lips. One man tore at his shirt with both hands, laughing from his mouth while his eyes wept in terror. Another gagged until his tongue cracked and split like dry mud. The sweet rot sang through the hall, louder than fire, louder than screams. It made my teeth ache with the urge to bite something, anything, just to end the noise of it. Room by room we cleared, the flames turning the walls to smoldering scrolls. In one chamber where a window sagged without glass, I caught a note beneath the plague hymn. Chalk dust and stale milk. My head snapped left, my nose pressing into the crack of a closet door. A heartbeat beat against the wood, small, fluttering, frantic. I barked once, sharp and fast. My handler looked where I looked. He always did. He saw, and he broke protocol because he was still human. One kick splintered the wood, and a child tumbled into the smoke light, eyes wide, breath wheezing. He lifted the bundle against his chest plate and held it like contraband hope. The commissar turned, glass eye cutting through smoke, heavy with judgment. For a moment the air froze, then the ceiling gave way 2 rooms over. Debris crashed down, and in the chaos my handler bent fast, buckled the child into the harness strapped across my chest. The small body pressed against me, heartbeat frantic against my ribs. I stood still while he cinched the strap. "Go," he whispered, pushing my flank. I carried the child out, every step a promise not to falter. The block did not fall quiet. It was merely recorded as contained. Outside, under a sky the wrong color, survivors staggered out coughing, black spit staining their boots. The child was torn from my harness by a medici drone whose voice rasped. Decontam! The word meant gone, erased, never seen again. My handler's hand lingered on the empty strap as if he could still feel the weight that had pressed there. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I leaned my head into his thigh hard enough that he grunted. His hand fell on my neck, trembling as he whispered again, "Good nose." This time it was not praise, it was penance. That night we were penned too, though our walls were less cracked and our water came in tin cups rather than cupped hands. In the barracks, men muttered words without voices, their eyes carrying jokes their mouths couldn't finish. One hummed a hymn he wasn't supposed to remember, low enough to pass as static. Masks rested on laps, within reach of twitching fingers. A trooper coughed into his sleeve, saying it was dust. We all pretended to believe him. On my mat, I slept in pieces, my nose awake even when the rest of me sank. Dreams came sour and sharp, carrying the sweet note through corridors with no walls. I woke with my teeth bared to the dark, my chest pounding as if I were still running. Days hardened into rhythm even when the clocks had no meaning. Morning chants, mass checks, patrol lines, cordon tape cut down only to be raised again, sealing off the city piece by piece. The propaganda vox crawled everywhere, dripping words of blessing and endurance, praising rot as resilience and disease as gift. Civilians bowed their heads, some with eyes empty, some with mouths whispering thanks to survive another day. A baker I remembered by his flour-stained hands now ladled out bread, gray-green with spores, calling it holy food. He handed a slice to a boy whose eyes were already glazed, pride softening his face. The bread smelled like mold and copper, wrong in a way my nose could not unlearn. My throat filled with bile. He did not smell of faith, only of relief. Mutation stopped surprising anyone unless they came all at once. Scales, a new knuckle, an eye that caught light where it should not, all greeted with shrugs or with recruiters' robes. One man grew a mouth beneath his ear and used it to mutter prayers, each syllable doubled. They handed him a banner. He marched in the front lines where everyone could see his devotion. But sometimes the change struck in a single heartbeat. A trooper laughed at a memory, stubbed his boot on a stair, turned to speak, and then froze mid-word. His jaw slackened, tongue withering as if the air itself dried him out. The sweet rot slammed into my nose so sharp I sneezed blood against the filter. By the time the flames lit, he was reaching for throats with fingers already bending into claws. The stairwell filled with smoke and soot that settled into the prints of boots. We walked over those blackened marks the next morning as though they had always been there, as though nothing had happened. It was easier that way, easier to keep moving, easier to obey. Roundups began to feel like calendar marks, grim reminders that time still passed. Lists arrived scrawled on cracked slates or scratched onto paper already stained with oil. The names didn't need reasons, and sometimes there weren't even names, just numbers, quotas of warm bodies demanded. People went without protest, some with heads bowed in resignation, others daring to lift their chins as if dignity could armor them. A few clutched at neighbors, trying to anchor themselves to something human, but the guards pried them apart without a word. I watched them go, noses stiff with terror sweat, their steps heavy with the scent of resignation. We all knew what collection meant. No one returned. Some whispered they were herded into the front lines as meat shields for chaos warriors. Others believed the dark Mechanicus took them apart piece by piece to study. The most fearful whispered of sacrifices, whole groups cut down in a single night to paint altars with their blood. Whatever the truth, the only proof was empty cots and the hollow silence left behind. Even among the occupiers, peace was an illusion. The warbands themselves clashed like thunderclouds colliding. I learned to read the signs the way I read the scents. Fresh paint streaked over old banners, symbols layered like scars. Gunshots rattled from garrisons where none should be. A new champion's colors dripping over the old lord's sigil meant we would suffer twice as hard. Once the lord who had first taken the city marched away with his elites. leaving behind word-bearers who split control among themselves. Rival apostles vied for power, each trying to outdo the others with monuments and sacrifices. For us, it meant doubled shifts, back-breaking labor to satisfy both ambitions. Another time, war erupted between Kornite berserkers and Slaaneshi cultists. We cowered under collapsed walls as god-maddened warriors slaughtered each other in alleys and plazas. When the smoke cleared, the victors punished us for the chaos as if we were the cause. Blood and ash became our inheritance for sins that weren't ours. The world itself changed under their rule, as if reality bent to suit their masters. The sky forgot its colors, trading them for bruised green or flashes of violet lightning with no thunder to ground them. Once, rain fell thick as sour milk, leaving rashes where it kissed skin. Another time, it was blood, hot and copper-rich, painting the streets in a shallow red tide. The ground buckled beneath our boots, fissures opening like mouths that wanted to speak. I smelled mold that whispered in shapes, spores arranging themselves into the runes painted on every wall. Vines burst from cracks in the pavement, thorns glistening wet and wrong, as if veins pulsed beneath the bark. I refused to sniff them. I pulled my handler away, hackles raised. He didn't question me. He never did. Doors began to breathe, exhaling rot, inhaling silence. Windows wept resin like tears. We avoided them all, stepping faster, pretending we hadn't noticed. Men broke in their own ways. Some went silent, rocking in corners until they became fixtures, barely moving, their smell fading into background despair. Others laughed too loud, hysteria curdling into screams that drew the overseers. Some chose to leave, wandering into wastelands beyond the city with steps steady and purposeful. None returned. We imagined them dead, or worse, reshaped into something unrecognizable. At times I envied them. Madness seemed a mercy compared to understanding everything. To remain aware here was its own punishment. Hope itself grew toxic. In the early days, men whispered imperial prayers in the dark, clutching hidden tokens and waiting for the emperor's wrath to sweep the sky clean. But years burned that faith to ash. Even if the Imperium returned, what would rescue mean? My ears had learned that word. Rescue smelled of fire, bleach, and finality. I knew it meant cleansing. It meant that if help came, it would come wrapped in purges and flames that spared no one. Even dogs could be deemed tainted. My handler never said it aloud, but his fingers in my fur told me he knew too. We went back into hab-stacks, manufactoria, medici wings that still pretended to heal. Always the same. Scent the air, mark the sweetness, cut the tape, breach, burn, tally, file. Once in a stairwell, I found a toy soldier carved from scrap. A dog etched crudely at its side. I picked it up and carried it in my teeth, dropping it on my handler's cot that night. He stared at it for a long time before tucking it into his breast pocket. He never mentioned it again, but I smelled the comfort it gave him, faint but real. In those small things we clung to what was left of us, in toys and gestures, in silence that held memory. Then came the day of the festival, declared without warning. Everyone was herded to the central square, both soldier and slave. Statues of imperial heroes had been toppled, replaced by iron spines hung with skulls and lit with green-black fire. The priests bellowed sermons in voices that rattled bones. Words no tongue should form, yet we understood. They raised vials of rot, glass vials humming with the same sweetness that had haunted my nose since the first morning. One shattered it over a brazier. The smoke crawled down, not up, touching our skins with fingers that felt too knowing. People laughed and cried in the same breath. Some shouted praise, others screamed as though the sound could disguise terror. My handler's hand gripped my harness so hard the straps cut into my hide. I pressed into him, holding him as much as he held me. The priest looked satisfied, and we were released back into our labors, branded by memory and fear. The scent did not fade. It would never fade. If you are reading this, you stand far from this place or in a time that has forgotten it. Remember that I smelled it first. I am a war dog. The plague does not come with horns or banners. It arrives as sweetness in air that has no right to be sweet, as laughter with no mouth behind it, as hunger at the wrong time. I carried warnings in my nose, gave them to him, and he gave them to those above. Fires were lit, bodies burned, reports written, but the scent lingered, always ahead of us. We saved some, we lost more, but still we walked forward. Each morning, straps buckled, boots marched, filters hissed. Each morning, I breathed the air and it breathed me. And each morning the sweetness came first, before ash, before smoke, before anything else. We endured because that was all there was left. Each new dawn, that pale imitation of morning, came the same way. The buckle of the harness, the hiss of the vox, the weight of the leash tugging me forward. The straps bit into my chest, but I was used to that pain. It was part of me now. My job was simple, even if the world itself had turned unbearable. I breathed and the city confessed its sickness through my nose. Some mornings it was ash and rust, others fear, sweat, and oil. But most mornings the sweetness lingered, that strange, rotten thread twisting through everything. It was always there, hiding beneath the stench of death, waiting. The men around me walked with their eyes on the ground, masks tight, prayers muttered under their breath. They smelled of exhaustion, of despair so thick it clung to their uniforms. My handler carried himself differently. Even when fear curled off him like smoke, his hand on my harness was steady. He gave me a wordless strength. When he whispered, "Good nose," it wasn't only praise. It was his way of telling himself we still had purpose. That purpose kept us both moving. It was survival dressed up as duty. Every patrol followed the same rhythm. Breach the tape, scent the air, enter the ruin, clear what was left. Sometimes it was empty halls and mold-chewing walls into pulp. Sometimes it was people, too far gone to still be called people. I always smelled it first. The sweetness sharpened just before a body convulsed, just before the plague inside twisted flesh into something unholy. My growl was the warning, my bark the alarm. The squad learned to trust it even if they pretended not to. They joked about it in whispers, but they kept their fingers tight on triggers whenever my ears pinned flat. Propaganda never stopped. The Vox preached blessings of rot. The priests praised disease as holy endurance. Civilians bent their heads, some out of belief, some out of hunger, some just to survive another day. I saw a man I knew, a baker whose hands once smelled of flour and warmth, stand at a corner with loaves green speckled with spores. He handed them out with trembling pride, calling them offerings of grandfather's love. I smelled the mold from across the street, bitter and sharp, wrong in every fiber of my being. Children chewed the bread anyway, their mothers crying silent tears as they pushed bites into small mouths. Faith, hunger, and desperation smelled the same here. Mutations became as ordinary as the weather. A new scale patch on an arm, an eye that shone too bright, fingers bending where they shouldn't. No one gasped anymore. Recruiters called these marks blessings, pulling the afflicted aside to serve in cult processions. The worst were the sudden ones. A man talking one moment, mid-sentence, then breaking in two with a sound like snapping bones. His skin bubbled, his tongue turned black. And before the flames took him, he laughed with a mouth that wasn't his. The squad burned him down to soot on the stairwell, and the next morning we walked across the prints left by our own boots, as if the black stains had always belonged there. It was easier that way, easier to pretend. Roundups carved chunks out of us. Sometimes it was names whispered, other times it was just numbers demanded. People went quietly, shoulders bowed, the smell of fear thicker than smoke. No one came back. I smelled the emptiness they left behind in bunks and barracks, a silence that reeked of absence, of grief buried alive. Even among the occupiers, unity was a lie. War bands fought like dogs over scraps of power, banners repainted overnight, shots echoing from garrisons. Each change brought us harder shifts, more punishments, more fear. For us, it didn't matter which sigil flew. Pain was pain, chains were chains. The city itself had turned traitor. Skies cracked into colors no animal should ever see. Greens bruised purple, lightning flashing without thunder. Rain fell like milk gone sour, burning rashes into skin. Once the sky rained blood for an hour, coating stone and steel until the world itself smelled like an open wound. Mold whispered sigils from walls, vines twined out of pavement, with thorns wet as veins. Doors breathed when you passed. Windows wept resin tears. I pulled my handler away from them all, my body tight, tail stiff, every sense screaming danger. He never questioned me. He let me lead. That trust was everything we had left. Men broke under the weight. Some sat in silence, rocking like broken machines. Others laughed until their laughter turned to screams that brought punishment. A few walked away, into wastelands no one returned from. At times I envied them. Madness smelled of peace compared to the sharp clarity of awareness. Hope itself became poison. At first men whispered imperial prayers in the dark, holding tokens under clothes. But years killed those prayers, burned them to ash. Even rescue, I knew, would not mean what they dreamed. Rescue smelled of bleach and fire. It meant purges, cleansing flames, virus bombs. My kind would not be spared either. My handler never said it, but I felt the truth in the way his hand trembled against my fur. One evening, under skies the color of sickness, we were herded to the square. A festival, they called it. Skulls hung on black iron spines, firelight green and black. Priests bellowed words that rattled my teeth, voices too large for human throats. They shattered a vial of sweetness over a brazier, and the smoke slithered down into us. It touched skin, crept into lungs, caressed bones. People laughed and wept, screaming praise or terror. It didn't matter which. My handler's grip on my harness was desperate, crushing. I leaned into him, bearing some of the weight he could no longer carry alone. The priest smiled with satisfaction. We were dismissed, but none of us left whole. The sweetness clung to me, wound into my fur, sank into my breath. It was always there. I am a war dog. I smelled it first. The plague didn't arrive with drums or banners. It came as sweetness in a place that had no right to be sweet, as hunger at the wrong time, as laughter with no mouth behind it. I carried the warning in my chest, gave it to him, and he gave it upward. Fires were lit, bodies burned, records kept. Some were saved, more were lost. Still, we walked forward, strapped and leashed, bound to duty. Each day I breathed, and the city exhaled its sickness into me. Each day the sweetness came first, before ash, before rust, before fear. We endured because there was nothing else left.